Up next, we have our Q&A session. So I saw some hands. Feel free to ask them your question. I have Patrick Rainey introducing the panel. So Patrick is the manager of the organic lab section at CARB's Monitoring and Laboratory Division. So Pat? So, oh yeah, if you're on the panel, come on up, and Pat will introduce you. Do you want this? Yeah.
Drop it in our pocket. Thank you, Grace. Well, it is my pleasure to be able to introduce the panel to you today. We've got the four panel members here, and it's kind of a unique panel, and I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. But our first panel member, Gwen Yoshimura from US EPA. She's worked with EPA since 2004, and she's now the manager of the Air Quality Analysis Office at EPA Region 9. Our second panel member is Kate Hogue, and she's with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Kate has worked in air quality since 1995. And she's currently an assistant manager at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Our third panel member is Kathy Gill, and she is with the California Air Resources Board. She joined the board in 2001, and she is currently the chief of the Air Quality Surveillance Branch within the Monitoring and Laboratory Division. And our fourth panel member is Ken Stroud, and he was formerly the chief of the Air Quality Surveillance Branch at ARB, and he is currently the chief of the Community Air Monitoring Branch within CARB. And I think it's kind of a unique opportunity because within the panel here, we have subject matter experts on community monitoring, regulatory monitoring, quality assurance, and laboratory operations. So, and we also have local, state, and federal perspectives within our panel here. So it is an open forum Q&A, so feel free to ask these folks any questions that you have on any topics. And hopefully they can field those. And one thing I would ask, if you do have a question, just please raise your hand and we can get the microphone out to you so everybody in the audience can hear the question. And since we are recording it, we'll have that as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and I will open up the floor for any questions that you have.
Oh, okay. This is for Michael, actually. You guys could answer it. But he was talking about the cherry picking on reporting the calibrations. So if I had this nightly calibration that's awkwardly, wrong or suspicious to me, remotely I trigger another calibration from my office. Runs just fine. Okay, and I figure maybe just a voltage glitch or something happened because it doesn't repeat again. I decide to report, the one that I consider, good to me, which is the one. So I'm cherry picking in these terms. Is that allowed, or should I be reporting the one that failed?
Well, we're going outside the panel.
The way that OEQPS is trying to implement things is that you should submit both checks. In the spirit of full transparency, the check that failed due to a voltage issue would just be flagged with a 1C code, and it won't be included in the AQS summary statistics. But we are asking that everyone submit all the checks.
Does AQS allow both, if you don't know it, because they just go by the date, not by the hour?
I haven't seen a duplicate record in the QA transaction. I'll have to check on that, but we can check on that, whether or not that's allowed in AQS.
Thank you.
Maybe while others think of questions, I might just take this opportunity to introduce some of the EPA folks that are in the room. We also had a little bit of shifting in our personnel. So For me, I'm the manager of the Air Quality Analysis Office, and then Michael and Fletcher are here. And Dina was here yesterday, and she'll be here tomorrow. And then Meredith is now our branch chief. So we've reorganized to be under branches. And Meredith, we are quite happy to say that she's now our branch chief. So she's here representing for the Technology Partnerships and Analysis branch, I believe. PTAD. Rolls off the tongue. And then Audrey Johnson is our Quality Assurance Section Manager. You might be familiar with Eugenia Branch. She is a branch chief as well. You might remember Eugenia McNaughton from previous years, and she is retired, and Audrey is now the branch chief for the Quality Assurance Section. And then we also have Matt Plate and Roseanne Sakamoto here from that group. So feel free to ask any of us any questions as you see us around today.
Okay, Gwen, I have a question for you then. So now that most of the districts have undergone a TSA, either through EPA or ARB, can you tell us what the top 3 issues, if you had to pick, that you'd like to see agencies address first?
I think it matches pretty closely with what Lena highlighted in her presentation, sort of consistency of procedures and making sure that you have your quality documents in place, and then also documentation to show that you're following those procedures, I would say would be the top 2. And then sort of connected to that all, I think, is training. So it's wonderful to see everybody here. I always feel like these are excellent training opportunities. But I would say that those are 3 main ones. I don't know if others on the panel have other thoughts.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I was just going to bring the conversation back to the validation templates. I'm just thinking, like, I'm coming from the QA side, right? So either you're doing something or you're not, and we're going to do something about it. So it's an appendix inside of a guidance document full of words like should and could and can, that are a little vague. How is EPA going to help, like, the local districts really understand what needs to be done, what should be done, what they have a little time with, what's like an actionable item on our end? More clarification, like on where EPA is going in that direction.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this to Matt. I think that there's a data validation SOP that's in the works.
So EPA is currently, we have an internal work group of EPA regions, and actually Michael is on the group as well. We're working to put together, Michael doesn't want to answer the question though, but we're working to put together a validation guidance document to help people understand how to interpret the validation template and compelling and weight of evidence and some of the other things that we throw out there, as well as legal defensibility and documentation, which aren't really covered in the template. It's important to understand with the template when you go into things like criteria, systematic and operational, that some of those things are regulatory requirements. So even though there might be not a criteria established for it, if you don't do it, you didn't meet the regulation and that data is invalid. So there is a little bit of understanding that you need to have about where those things come from, and it does have those in the template. Does it come from a reg? Does it come from guidance? If something comes from reg and you're not doing it, there is a concern.
Yeah, that's important, Matt. And what I wanted to highlight is that the validation templates do, so there's 3 columns in the validation template in terms of what the criteria is, frequency, and then like what the limits are. And each of those have, in the final column of the validation templates, have either a citation back to the specific regulatory text or citation to guidance. So that is a way to kind of understand, like, if you go into the validation template and you look at the QC check line, the critical line, the reference will be, 40 CFR Appendix A 3.2.1. I don't know if that's the actual one, but it's listed in there for your reference.
While we are on the subject of the validation template, do we have the trace level validation template? Is it completed?
I have a question here on considering the community air monitoring and what quality controls are going to be implemented on that, and what are we looking forward to coming around the corner?
Sure. So the question was, what quality controls are required for community monitoring? And in our guidance that we developed for AB 617 in the blueprint, we don't specify specific criteria, but what we ask for in the planning process is that you design enough quality assurance into your program that you can articulate what you end up with as far as your quality of your data. And that's important, we think, for when you ultimately take your data to a decision maker, whether it's to maybe conduct enhanced enforcement or maybe implement some incentives for a particular industry, that there is some level of known quality of the data. And then what was the second question?
Just looking at that, and as far as if that would ever maybe impact regulatory data, because I know that some of the equipment that we do look at using is regulatory versions. So if the regulatory, meaning like an example is we currently do get audited on our regulatory equipment, if the audits would ever be performed on a community monitoring equipment, even random audits.
Yeah, so we are conducting some community air monitoring now. It's not 617, it's under our SNAPS programs, Study of Neighborhood Air Quality under near petroleum sources. And so we are actually have requested an audit. It's not required, this isn't 40 CFR, but we think it's a good practice and it's going to help us defend our data.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Ken to maybe expand a little more on how he sees the vision of community air monitoring and how it fits in with regulatory monitoring in the future, in the next couple years, say, where you see it going.
Sure, vision of community air monitoring, I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask community members, they'd like to see, more, I think, regulatory sites in their communities, and that's maybe a valid critique of our program, that we're not in every disadvantaged community in the state. Maybe we should be. But as far as community monitoring for 617, each of these we call them year one communities, 10 of them, they have like a 5-year lifespan on them for 617. So the vision is after 5 years, these local sources of pollutants in their community are going to be addressed and things will be better. That's kind of community by community what we're looking at.
On the question about audits, I wanted to add one more thing, is the air pointer that we have out there, the reason we purchased that was our vision is to put that into a community where it's surrounded, hypothetically, let's say by 30 sensors. We would be able to collect information and compare the data against that air pointer. So rather than testing each sensor, it's going to be kind of a global approach. That's one option we're considering. The other option is we've purchased an environmental chamber to test sensors. So working with Ken's group, I envision that environmental chamber will be used to certify sensors before they're deployed. Again, we're still working it out. And that would be in conjunction with South Coast. We want to enhance that program, not duplicate what South Coast is doing. So we kind of have two things in the works for QAing sensors.
Follow up with these community sensors and the QA protocols and whatnot. We have mandates, so that means we have to do this. We have no much of a choice if we are designated or whatnot. Technologies, agencies, South Coast, CARBs are testing them. They have the resources to determine, the accuracy of these instrumentations and whatnot. We're just sort of waiting for that kind of guidance. If it is left up to us to decide what kind of protocol we're going to be doing to qualify these instruments? How are we going to do the QC checks and whatnot? I think it's not that we're doing their job, but we're going to be doing something maybe incomplete or not accurate. What we're looking is for that kind of guidance coming from you guys is that doing this test with those resources so that we can back up whatever information we give to the community. You know, this thing is being tested not just for us, but from these other agencies. So that's the kind of guidance we kind of hope to have, because these other mandates are pulling us in different directions and overlapping at the same time. And it's getting very confusing. AB 617, you know, AB 1647 and 1240s and whatnot. The whole soup of alphabet. So guidance is really what we want.
So your question is there guidance?
Is that in the works? Is that in the works? Because what I heard you for answering is leaving it up to them to come up with their own. So everybody's going to be doing their own again.
Yeah.
We're going to be in the same, you know, South Coast does it this way, Bay Area does it this way, CARB does it this way. So who's right?
Yeah, there's no one way. There's multiple ways. And so we do have guidance and, again, our blueprint about how to plan for community air monitoring. And we firmly believe that if you follow that guidance and doing a proper plan, that you'll come out with a solid community air monitoring program at the end. But you could also build off what the other districts, like you mentioned, South Coast, Bay Area, San Joaquin, San Diego, all what they're doing.
Yeah, I'll just add that this is part of the big challenge, right? Because there is no one community air monitoring. When we use that term, I think we're talking about this shift from monitoring that's representative of a larger area that's driving NACS decisions, or a high concentration area that's driving a NACS decision for a jurisdiction. But for community air monitoring, that's anything to address any concern or area concern or source of concern that the steering committee or community brings up. So that is terrifying a little bit, because it opens things up so broadly. And so you need that flexibility. Some of our communities, I don't think, will have sensor networks as that solution. It's not the solution that I think I would suggest for somebody that wants to collect data to drive and justify a highly contentious new regulation, for example, for a specific source or source category. So I think the hard thing is that we're building up the experience right now with the examples that we're doing, both in AB 617 and other programs like SNAPS and other things that South Coast is doing, to have a different library of options. But it really has to start with, you know, monitoring objectives and why are you monitoring in the first place, and go all the way down to what your data objective or, you know, your DQOs and everything has to be in order to meet that objective, right? Because if people just want their data to be informing them about whether to run on a greenway during a day, that's one thing. But if you're trying to, you know, revise a rule to address fugitive emissions from coal piles at a port, that's very different. So I think there won't be one guidance document, but I'm hoping that over time we can build up a lot of good examples of things that have worked and that people can draw from and put together, you know, combinations of things that'll work for their communities too.
Question over here on the side.
Okay, so it's kind of a question as well as a statement in terms of low-cost sensors and the differences between a station that you guys are maintaining hands-on every day and quality control checks every day versus a sensor that gets placed in the community that you don't have the ability to do those QC checks. I mean, it's possible you place a sensor, the next day a spider moves into it and affects the readings. How do you tell the difference between a sensor failure, an insect inside it, or some other kinds of real air quality readings? And I think the only way to do it in the future is going to be artificial intelligence type of things, looking at the data itself, comparing hundreds of sensors against each other versus one sensor that is maintained hands-on. So are there steps being taken to look at artificial intelligence, looking at the data stream itself to determine QC rather than actual QC tests with clean air or things that you do to the sensor itself?
The question was, are there efforts to use AI to QC the data from sensor networks?
Realization that is going to be the future, that you have to start using AI on the data stream rather than hands-on the sensor.
I agree with you. I do think that is the answer, and I'm aware of some efforts, but CARB is not involved in those. Kate?
I'll just add that I think it is, machine learning and a lot of other kinds of advanced data analysis techniques are going to be really important as our data sets grow in size, because we can't have kind of the hands-on approach that we have. But I think we need to build a smart system that goes beyond that a little bit, because I think one thing that we personally experienced as an agency during wildfires and other things is that type of machine learning that's trained on a set or a subset of different types of conditions might not always apply, and you might actually get some unintended consequences if you rely on it solely. I think it's really powerful to get you most of the way there, but I think there's going to be other solutions that help make sure that those unintended consequences don't propagate out to the public with you being unaware about it and catching it on the tail end with questions from your communications office.
I think we had Mallory up here. Yeah, we've got
All right. On AB 617, as far as the selections, I understand early on, there was a presentation yesterday, and it showed, of course, the major districts in the state and just a few other areas. But I'm wondering if either Ken can share or Katie can share your experience in the selections, like how you went about discussing with CARB when the Bay Area was selected. Obviously there's some low-hanging fruit in some of those areas because of the demographics and the pollution. And then for the secondary selections coming up, what you'll be looking at.
That's a really good question. It's an area I haven't been involved in, so I don't really have an answer for you.
And I guess I'll start at the back end of your question. I don't know if anybody is here from CARB that wants to speak to year 2. I think there's still kind of ongoing discussions about how that's going to work, given what we know and how year 1 is working where we're at. I think one of the things our agency would like to do is take the next year to spend more time getting our communities ready to be on steering committees and be a true hand-to-hand partner in these activities, because it's taken, I'm primarily involved in our Richmond work, since that's focusing on monitoring, and that's taken us a year to get a steering committee to the point where they can have productive discussions and move some of these decisions forward. And when the regulation only gives you 9 months to get to a plan, that kind of spin-up time isn't really compatible. So the selection process for year 1 was challenging because we don't have all of that information tied together in that format to address that need in the way you would want. So we acknowledged that it was going to be a work in progress and our first stab at something. We did the best analysis we could with both our modeling and monitoring data. We looked at socioeconomic indicators and other things from a lot of screening tools, kind of the differences between those, and pulled out a few things that we thought were the most useful in terms of highlighting our initial areas of focus, and we kind of had some prioritized year 1 through 5 areas, but then acknowledged the other places that probably have issues too, and also acknowledged that there are things out there that we don't know, and that we'll find more of those over time as well. So that list is always kind of in flux. But we also did a huge amount of community engagement around that effort too, and this is something that's, I know, new, especially from the technical side, is that kind of really genuine, deep partnership, community engagement. We ended up doing, I think, 12, city or regional, or little area public meetings before we submitted our draft recommendations to CARB to get comment on those, to get people to come out and talk to things. Each community was different as far as how much engagement we got, and we're trying to build up that over time as well, those relationships with people to have them come talk to us. But it was a challenging effort, and that's all changing and on time, and will be interesting going forward to see how that meshes with also the push and pull between communities that are more vocal and informed versus ones that also might be disproportionately impacted but don't have the same kind of advocacy groups or awareness that some of our primary or historically active areas are.
We're running short on time. I think we could take one more question. Well, I have one then for Gwen. A topic came up yesterday, and it was regarding EPA looking at revisiting and hopefully updating the PM regulations. So my question is, do you think that will include revisiting the co-location requirements to allow agencies to incorporate more of the FEM or new technology into their networks?
So I think that the potential for revisions is tied to what happens with the NACs. In the past number of years, it's been EPA has not really revised any monitoring portions of the reg without having the actual NACs change. It's been sort of EPA has been reluctant to do so. So we'll see what happens with the PM NACs. Tim Hanley from OEQPS has sort of put out offer to solicit comments from folks if you have any suggestions about what you would like to see changed, if there is the opportunity to revise the PM NACs. So I think that co-location is certainly one of those topics. I know there's been a lot of discussion from districts as well as from regions about desires to see those requirements change. So that's definitely a good one for us to bring back to him, and then also if you want to echo those.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank all the panel members. We're out of time, but I'd like to thank all the panel members, and I believe they're going to be around for the rest of the day. So if you do have any additional questions, you can catch up with them, and hopefully they can address your questions at that time. So thank you.
So we are on lunch now, so we'll be back in your guys' breakout sessions that you choose at 1:30. Please remember to fill out your general session evaluation cards for this first half of the day, and we'll see you in an hour and a half.